Good morning, or perhaps it's good afternoon. We are in that happy space where either works. So typical of translation. It's my pleasure really today to be in conversation with Syeda, Hameed and Arshia Sattar. You've already heard who they are, so we can plunge straight into the conversation. I'm going to start by asking both of you about the fact that your expertise lies in translating from or working with languages that are perhaps, and Sanskrit of course is not an everyday language anywhere in the world at all. Urdu is certainly a living language, but it also has this strange status that it has acquired for various reasons, both internal to the language and external in terms of the political landscape. So I want to start by asking each of you to give us a lay of the land of the language itself, where it came, where, all the different versions of it. We tend to think of it as a monolithic unit, but it is not. If Sanskrit was spoken one day, there must have been different registers and different classes and different sections of people speaking. The same with Urdu. It is also often thought of by those who don't speak Urdu as being a sort of single language spoken in only one way, and there are all these myths associated with it. Urdu is a very beautiful language, is the song of music, is the language of romance, and so on. So could you start by giving us a sense of the landscape of the language?
Shukriya, bahut. It's such an honor to be being moderated by you, such a well-known translator from Bengali into English, and to be with Arshia Sattar, who it's amazing that, I'm being so stereotypical, but a Muslim who's an expert in Sanskrit and translating from Sanskrit. I think that's India. And I think that if I take something back from this festival, I will take back the undercurrent of communalism, which has again and again and again been attacked by various speakers, and especially in the last session that I was part of, which was Mrinal Sen and Khwaja Ahmad Abbas. So having said that, yes, I think that Urdu is a language which is increasingly regarded as very esoteric. In Delhi, we have a phenomenon called Rekhta, which has become, it's gone viral. Thousands of people come and attend this 100% Urdu gathering where only Urdu and Urdu and Urdu. And let me just add to this, because I don't want long answers, it gets a little boring. Urdu was essentially a Lashkari Zaban, the language of the Lashkar. It was a language which derived a lot from Hindi and Hindavi. You hear the word, you have all heard Amir Khusro. And you know that Amir Khusro wrote a combination of Farsi and Hindavi. He wrote, Zehale miski makun taghaful, durai naina banaye batiyan. My condition is so sad because you're oblivious of me. Zehale miski makun taghaful, durai naina banaye batiyan. So half of it you understand, and half of it, if you just deconstruct it a little bit, it becomes evident. So I'll talk more about my journey, but I think that maybe I'll revert back to Arshia.
Thank you, but one quick question before that. What is Hindavi?
Hindavi is a combination of Hindi, Braj Bhasha, local languages that are combined in a very generic manner, which gives rise to a hybrid language. So whether it is Ras Khan or whether it's Amir Khusro, any of the poets from that Indo-Gangetic plain who used to write in this language, everyone has heard of Padmavat. Padmavati, the film. Padmavat was written by a man called Malik Muhammad Jaisi from Jais, a place in UP. And that was also in Hindavi, in Hindavi and Hindi and Urdu all combined. So it's really a hybrid, a Lashkari language.
Sorry, again, I'll come to you, Arshia, but I'm very tempted to tell you a little story from a novel by Satyajit Ray, the first Feluda novel, The Detective, which was called Badshahi Angti. The Badshahi, you know, an Angti is ring. It was set in Lucknow. And in one of the scenes, a stone is thrown through a window with a little paper wrapped around it. And the detective unwraps it and reads it. And his sidekick asks him, what does it say? And he says, it's in Urdu. And so he says, but what does it say? And he said, it says, Khub Hushyar. And the boy says, but you said Urdu. That's not Urdu, that's Bengali. And so there it is.
Very nice, yeah.
Yes, sorry.
I have to say, when I realized that my panel was called...
You have to speak closer to the mic.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So when I realized this panel was called Mother Tongue, and I was going to be talking about Sanskrit, I was like, not my mother tongue. But the point is actually that Sanskrit is nobody's mother tongue. It could be considered, as Ramanujan would consider it, A.K. Ramanujan, a father tongue. It's a language of the outside world. It's not a language that is spoken in the family. It's a language of power. And as we know, increasingly it's become a language of caste, right? So it's a language that sits in hierarchy and also establishes hierarchy. And it is monolithic in a sense. I mean, Sanskrita means the refined, the perfected, the created, the honed, the polished, right? As against Prakrita, which are the languages that, you know, plebeians like us speak, right? Mixed up languages, Hindavis, Urdus, Lashkari Zabane, all like that. Sanskrit is not that. It is completely the opposite. So Sheldon Pollock, of course, has written about this very eloquently in Language of the Gods in the World of Men. But what I have found interesting more recently is Peggy Mohan's book, yeah, Kings, Wanderers, Merchants, which is one of the things she talks about there is the development of language in the subcontinent, in South Asia. And what she has to say about Sanskrit is absolutely fantastic, because what the Indo-Aryans migrated into India with, migrated, not invaded, migrated. The language they came with is actually more correctly thought of as Vedic. But for various, as you said, external and internal things to a language itself, and because of the kind of religious politics that we are experiencing now, it's very important that Sanskrit and Vedic be the same thing. We have to own the Rig Veda as Hindus. We cannot not own it. But in fact, Sanskrit developed as an encounter, or the language that became Sanskrit developed from the encounter between migrating peoples with their sets of consonants and syllables and syntax and grammar, and what they encountered in the subcontinent, which was a completely different set of sounds. The rs, all the retroflexes, and then, you know, various other alchemies took place, and we are able to speak of a perfected language once Panini shows up and takes everything you know, under his wing, as it were. But Wendy Doniger, I was telling her this, like, why didn't you tell me this about Sanskrit? And she said, I did, you weren't listening. But she has a lovely way of talking about it. You know, all these priests, yeah? They would go there and they would do their homas, and somebody was an Advaryu, and somebody was a this, and somebody was a that. And then they would come home and they would talk to their mothers about what had been cooked in the kitchen. And they brought new words and new sounds into the lexicon of what became Sanskrit. But it is now really a monolithic language, and the differences within Sanskrit exist in genre. You know, if you're using philosophical Sanskrit, you're going to use, if you're doing Shastra, you're going to use particular kinds of constructions, particular kinds of meters, particular grammatical forms. If you're doing epic, kavya, you know, so for example, I mean, Appa was very generous and said, I'm an expert in Sanskrit. I'm not. I only know how to read Ramayana. That's all I know how to do. Because Sanskrit within itself is that different, depending on what you want to say. and who you're saying it to. So I'm just a storyteller.
So are you saying that it is really what we call Sanskrit today was really the language of texts and formal documents and so on, but everyday conversation was in a different language or in a version of the language or a different language altogether?
You know, okay, Ramanujan used to not, I mean, he didn't say this, he quoted somebody saying, a language is a dialect with an army. Right? So I don't know whether we can say these are versions of languages or whether they are lingua franca, like, you know, how we speak in Bombay. Bombay Hindi is Gujarati, Marathi, you know, Urdu, Farsi, it's all kinds of things. But is it a version of Hindi? No, it's not. It is unto itself, as it was. So I think people were speaking discrete languages that were mutually intelligible. As we all do, especially actually now, is a very good time to think about this because people are not reading. Our literatures are dying, but we're all speaking many languages. The funny thing is we're all speaking many languages badly. Yeah, no, I mean, people say, yeah, I can speak Malayalam. Oh, yeah, Kannada. But can you read and then? Why not? Because unless you read, we don't have anybody to write for. And we are impoverished together by that. Not that, oh yeah, if you don't read and I don't write, I'll have no money, I won't earn a living. No, we are intellectually impoverished by not reading and writing together. You know, so I think something like that was going on maybe 2,500 years ago. Many languages were being spoken badly, and then some, the ones that had an army, got a form. And
really a Valmiki or is Valmiki sort of construction? Talk to us about that, because we all talk about what's in it, but we never talk about the writing of it or the
because nobody reads
creation of it.
Everybody says, I know Ramayana. I don't have to read. You don't know Ramayana. It's a very wonderful book. So I don't think Valmiki is a singular entity. I think Valmiki is a construct. I think the Ramayana, like the Mahabharata, was composed over centuries and centuries. It shows multiple politics, particularly with regard to women, both texts. Ramayana, just as an example, Ramayana ends very beautifully, very logically, at the end of the war. In the Yuddha Kanda, you know, Ravana has been defeated, Sita has been won back, 14 years are over, Rama is going to go back to Ayodhya and claim his throne. So he goes, and there's a Pattabhishekam, becomes king. We are waiting for the happily ever after. But then something else happens, and that is the Uttarakanda, right? So I think the Uttarakanda, not I think, I mean, it's very clear that the Uttarakanda, like the Balakanda, is an older, a much later composition. But what it does to Ramayana, it forces us to read it retrospectively. Right? So we have to consider Sita's actions now in the light of the fact that she is a queen, she's pregnant, they've been separated for so long. So an older version of ourselves, an older version of our society was perfectly willing to accept a woman who had been abducted against her will and who had come back to her loving husband. But a later version of ourselves, of a society that we live in, like we do now, rejects the possibility that a woman might have been innocent, that a woman might have used her free will, you know, to keep her abductor at bay. So in order to put that woman in her place, we have this very, very ugly situation where there is gossip about her and her husband banishes her. So Valmiki is a construct for sure. Why was Ramayana written? How was it written? I mean, compared to Mahabharata, it's really, really poetry. Much of the Ramayana is extremely beautiful, extremely lyrical. But I think it was written at this very interesting time in the history of the development of what we now call Hinduism. It was the Vedic period had, waned when the Brahmins were in charge, and now all over the Gangetic Plain, oligarchies, kingdoms were developing. So Kshatriyas were in power. So both the epics actually are a battle for temporal supremacy between priests and warriors, right? And of course the warriors win. So that is really what the epics are about. So they are speaking to these people, they're speaking about these people, and they're telling their stories in opposition to the Vedism that prevailed previously, but also in opposition to Buddhism and Jainism. Because the epics are written within, they start to be composed within 100 years of the death of the historical Buddha and historical Mahavira. And what are these guys doing? They're Kshatriyas who are going off looking for truth, right? No, Kshatriya, don't go, come back, right? Rule your kingdom. So they're written as a counter-narrative to the Brahmins and to Kshatriyas who are saying, no, I can't deal with this, I want to go find God. No, you please come back to your kingdom. You can go to the forest, you can go into exile, you can have your conversations with the rishis and the munis and all like that, but you have to come back. So it's actually the return of the king. The narratives are of the return of the king. So
I'm just struck in a different context by the whole idea of rewriting history almost with a counter narrative, which is exactly what we're seeing now. Yeah. But who is it written for? If it is written in this high Sanskrit, as it were, then who is reading, or how is it being disseminated?
Well, it's written for you and me, really. It's not high Sanskrit. Ramayana is relatively high Sanskrit. Mahabharata, he went to the market, he bought a pineapple.
You're not supposed to know about the Mahabharata.
Sorry?
You're not supposed to know.
No. But you can't know one without knowing the other. Yeah. But Ramayana is, the market was gone to by him, the market decorated with beautiful buntings. The most perfect of all pineapples appeared before his eyes. He's still buying the pineapple, but there's a more exalted way of talking about the mundane activity of buying a pineapple. So they're narrative texts, right? So they're driven, the purpose of the text is the story, not the language, right? So they're not really terribly exalted. I mean, I'm very struck by what Appa was saying in terms of the provenance of these languages and these poems and these stories, because they're trickling up and they're trickling down, So everybody who's telling the story of the Mahabharata may not be using the Sanskrit that we attribute to the Vyasa text, right? Or may not even be using a language that is recognizably Sanskrit. But the stories are the same. And what has been canonized from that period for us is the Sanskrit texts, right? And, later other language versions. But of that moment, it's a Sanskrit text that we have, which is another kind of politics also. Because they become panegyrics. Both Ramayana and Mahabharata are recited at great public sacrifices. They legitimate the sons of the king. They tell the king who his ancestors were and all like that. So they're bardic, they're panegyric, and they are about politics. They're about legitimation, whatever they might have been outside the court or before. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but I'll come back to that. If I may ask you, Syeda. So will you talk us through the use of the language in literature?
Yes, I'd like to say that my love for translating from Urdu to English has its underpinnings in Calcutta. There was a man in Calcutta, his name was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. He used to live in Ripon Street. He became one with all the biggest freedom fighters, and ultimately chose the portfolio of education when every portfolio was offered to him. He started off in Calcutta and he translated the Quran. The Quran translated, explicated, and commentary, which is called Tarjuma and Tafsir of the Quran. Now, for me, that was a very big challenge, and to render it into English, because now, as we have said a few times during this conference, that Islam is the most misunderstood, the most lambasted faith in the globally. And I always go back to Abul Kalam Azad's Tarjumanul Quran. That's where my translation work started. So I owe a lot to this city. Now the next thing I want to say is that Urdu is now erroneously regarded as a language of the Muslims. I think this idea has to be, and rejection can start here in Calcutta. The book that I'm working on now, we have given it a tentative title, which is it's a very frivolous sort of a title, may change, Madhuban mein Radhika Nache Re. Madhuban mein Radhika Nache Re, you have all heard from the film Kohinoor. Who sings it on stage? A man called Yusuf Khan, Dilip Kumar. Who dances? A woman called Kumkum, whose real name was Mehjabeen. Who wrote the lyrics? A man called Shakil Badayuni. Who composed the music? A man called Naushad. Now this is what India is all about. And in that context, I feel that that aspect has to be now brought before. It has been brought many times. But what we are trying to do in this book is to bring together, we are only choosing 100, but there are thousands of poems that have been written by Hindus on subjects of the Prophet, Islam, the Khulafai Rashidin, Maula Ali, all of that written by Hindus. There are thousands of poems written by Muslims on Holi, Diwali, Ram, Krishna, Mahabharat, Ramayana. Now that's a plethora, but who has ever seen it, or whoever, when the notion is that separate the communities, Muslims idhar, Hindu idhar, and drive a wedge between them, then of course Urdu becomes the language of Muslims and Hindi, Sanskrit becomes the language of Hindus. And we want to do this in a very popular way to break that. Now I just want to, with your permission, I decided that there are two stanzas of a poem written by Kaifi Azmi. And I am really obsessed now, somehow 6th December never goes out of my heart or my mind. So I want to quote to you Kaifi Sahab's poem, which is called Dusra Banvas, which means my second exile. This is very small print, so I'll need my glasses. It's called दूसरा बनवास. राम बनवास से जब लौट के घर में आए, राम बनवास से जब लौट के घर में आए, याद जंगल बहुत आया जो नगर में आए. रक़्स दीवानगी आंगन में जो देखा होगा, 6 दिसंबर को श्री राम ने सोचा होगा, इतने दीवाने कहाँ से मेरे घर में आए. जगमगाते थे जहाँ राम के कदमों के निशान, प्यार की कहकशां लेती थी, प्यार की कहकशां लेती थी जो अंगड़ाई जहां, मोड़ नफरत के उसी राह गुजर में आए. धर्म क्या उनका था, क्या जात थी, ये जानता कौन. घर न जलता तो उन्हें रात में पहचानता कौन. घर जलाने को मेरा लोग जो घर में आए. शाकाहारी है मेरे दोस्त तुम्हारे खंजर, शाकाहारी है मेरे दोस्त तुम्हारे खंजर. तुमने बाबर की तरफ फेंके थे सारे पत्थर, तुमने बाबर की तरफ फेंके थे सारे पत्थर. है मेरे सर की खता जख्म जो सर में आए. पांव सरयू में अभी राम ने धोए भी न थे, एक नजर के नजर आए वहां खून के गहरे धब्बे। राम ये कहते हुए सरयू के किनारे से उठे, इस शहर की हवा रास नहीं आई मुझे, 6 दिसंबर को मिला दूसरा बनवास मुझे. Now I have to this is how I have translated it. When Ram returned home from exile, he saw maniacs dancing in his courtyard. How he longed for the jungle left behind. On December 6th, Shri Ram must have wondered, where from are these lunatics in my home? What is their religion? What is their caste? Had my home not burned down in the blackest night, who would have recognized them? Pyromaniacs who came to burn my house. Where Ram's footprints were orbs of light, Kehkasha of love had lit up once what are today hate-filled twists and turns and lanes. All your daggers, my friends, are vegetarian. At Babur you have flung your every stone. It is my head which is at fault for receiving those wounds. In river Saryu, Ram hadn't yet dipped his feet when he saw dark blood patches on his earth. Rising from banks of the river, feet still unwashed, rising from his own threshold, Ram spoke. My capital's ambience didn't suit me at all. On December the 6th, I received my second exile. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's come to translation. When you're translating from Urdu, what are you thinking in terms of who's going to read them, what kind of language you want them to read it in, what kind of English or any other language that you translate into? Do you want them to feel they're reading something written now, contemporary, timeless, or belonging to a particular time and space? What choices do you make?
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question. Everyone loves to read Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Hum Dekhenge. Everyone loves to read Sahid Ludhianvi. Excuse me. Everyone loves to read Sahid Ludhianvi. Everyone loves to read Ali Sardar Jafri. But what I want to do, and this is what I've been doing, I have an ancestor who in 1915 wrote the first feminist poem about the importance, the dignity and the status of women. ऐ माओ बहनों बेटियों दुनिया की जीनत तुमसे है, मुल्कों की बस्ती हो तुम्ही, कौमों की इज्जत तुमसे है. In 1915, then wrote a long poem which is almost like 200 6-line verses called Musaddas in Urdu. It's a 6-line, I would say, verse. About 200 or 300 of those on the rise, ebb and tide in Islam. And that is lambaste the Muslims for not having adhered to the original importance, the original lessons, the original expansiveness of Islam. He wrote this in 1930s or somewhere there. Now that at that time when this poem was recited, there were people thronged, and Muslims and men and women cried when they heard, you know, this man and he was a Maulana, so nobody could ever question him, and he lambasted the Muslims. To me, then, to answer your question, I could do a lot of romantic things and that would be very popular, but I think these are hard-hitting things. Whether it's Maulana Abul Kalam Azad's Tarjumanul Quran, or whether it's Maulana Altaf Husain's Hali's Musaddas-e Hali, or whether it was Hali's Lament for the Widow, which again was written back in 1915. So I want that strong message to go out through the Urdu language to people so that what has this country become? It's become very difficult for us to live and breathe here.
So we invoke what is the true spirit of Islam, deriving it directly from the Quran, not through this Maulana and that Maulana and this commentator and that commentator, and through poetry. So maybe not today, maybe sometime long after I'm gone, this will be, somehow this should heal the wounds that have been inflicted. I think of December the 6th, but it has even gone further back than that. But this is my ultimate objective.
Thank you. And speaking for all of us, we are grateful to you for bringing this out. And we owe you an apology as well. Arshia, tell us about your decision of what kind of language to put the Ramayana into.
So it's a double bind, no, because it's not just separated from us, like in time, but also in space. That we don't live in that world anymore. It's not like translating The Vegetarian or something from Korean, right? Or like your own work, which is very, very, very contemporary. So I think, for me, it was important to make it easy for people to read, to make it mellifluous, as it were, which it is naturally so, Ramana, but also to remind us that we are reading something that is not ours. Yeah. So, for example, the word dharma. Right? I didn't translate the word dharma. And everybody's like, oh, you're a coward. You couldn't find one word for it. I said, no, I'm not a coward. I actually think I was being quite the opposite. I was being very brave because we don't know what dharma means. That is the problem of the Mahabharata. Dharma is sukshma. And somebody asks, even when, the only person who has the answer to dharma is Krishna. When Arjuna says, what should I do? He says, do your dharma. Go and fight. But the problem of Ramayana and Mahabharata really is, what is the right thing to do? Is it a duty? Is it an obligation? Is it for the greater good? Is it for the individual good? So I don't translate the word dharma in my translation of Ramayana because by the time you finish the book, you will have understood everything that the word implies. You may not know what it means, but you will know at least the ambit of the word, right? Other words like Rakshasa. What is Rakshasa? Yeah, demon? No. Demon is not a concept that enters our religious discussions, right? It is an oppositional being, right? When you think of, if you think of one of the words that is quite often used as a synonym for Rakshasa, Asura, right? It's actually Sura, the word is Sura, which means Devata, which means God, and Asura is one who is not that, right? So I don't want to make this person demonic, right? It is also about othering, right? So those kinds of, I guess my own ideologies do inflect the text very much, but then, there is also the more mundane problem of, my favorite example, so forgive me if you've heard it before, Sita is a Gajagamini, right? Walking like a female elephant. Right? Now, this is, if you've seen a female elephant walk, as many people of our generation in India have, you realize what a compliment it is, right? But if a non-Indian person or anybody who hasn't had the great good fortune of seeing an elephant walk, right, is going to say, what is this? How could she be beautiful? So that kind of thing you negotiate, as you know, with a phrase, with the pars, you open it up a little bit. So I say Sita walked with a swaying grace. But the word is Gajagamini, and look at what I've given up. The alliteration, the beauty, the short syllable, the long syllable. The Gajagamini itself is onomatopoeic almost, right? And you see, all of that is gone. But I cannot say Sita walked like an elephant. It's not possible. Right? It takes away everything that it's supposed to give you. So there's that as well. And also, I was thinking about this morning, people say, oh, who do you translate for? Do you translate for an Indian audience, for a Western audience? And I'm like, it is now the same audience, right? Look at our young people. Yeah? I can honestly say, I can ask a classroom of people, have you seen an elephant walk? And chances are half the people are not going to have seen that, right? So we are now living in a globalized zeitgeist, as it were, right? So the Indian audience and the Western audience is the same audience. It's a good thing for people like us. You know, we have that much less work to do. But it's also, I think there's a terrible flattening of experience and expression, you know, when we do that.
It's taken away the uniqueness of our individual experiences, right? We're all converging on something. But it's not just language or time and space. There's also the fact that when you're reading the Ramayana today, you are reading it in a very different way from contemporary audiences. You're reading it not necessarily as instructions or morals or fables, but you're also reading it critically as a commentary on behavior. So does that go into your translation? Do you feel it should? What are your thoughts on this?
Of course, we are all in our translations, right? I mean, our voices are there, our politics are there, our ideologies are there. But what I'm extremely aware of is that the Ramayana is so multivalent that it is read differently by different people, which is probably, you know, because of its unique position, not simply as a classic, not simply as a great literary work, but because of its religious significance, right? So that, I think, sets it apart from, say, the kind of work that you might do. That, in a sense, you are reading, you are giving the reader a frame in which to apprehend the text, right, through your translation. But I can't do that because somebody else is reading it with a great, great sense of devotion and fulfillment. And I am reading it for something else, you know. So Ramayana, I don't think can, Ramayana will never be one thing. Whatever I do with my translation, somebody's going to read it differently. And, you know, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that actually can get me into trouble, even though I have never been disrespectful. I love Ramayana, probably more than some of the people who claim to love it. But it's open to be read any way that people choose, you know, especially with anger.
For her. Have you ever had any aspersions cast upon the fact that you're a Muslim and you're translating and your work? I mean, has that happened? Just one or two things.
Well, what happens is I don't, when I write something, you know, even like in magazines and all like that, I don't read any of the comments because I don't want to see this. I really don't. But a friend will say, "Acha, be careful, you know, somebody had said something like this." And I suppose I'm very proud of the fact that I've appeared on some wanted list. I'm in the top row. Really? Yeah. But you know, it's what you're saying, that we, whether or not there are any direct comments or verbal assaults or anything, we live in fear, you know. I actually cannot believe that I'm speaking in public. It's been 4 years. Also pandemic, of course, but also, you know, we retire from the public space because we just, who wants to be aggressed upon, you know? It's tough.
Yes, you know what happened 2 days ago when the education minister of Bihar, Chandrasekhar, quoted some verses. He was using the Ramcharitmanas, and he said that these verses, and he quoted the verses without referring to a text. And he said, what are these things saying about women? They're saying women are not human but objects. And he said, why should we accept this? And why will we not fight back against it? And of course, immediately there was this thing about he has heard the sentiments of Hindus. It is a strange sentiment that upholds the thought that women are objects. And you consider that you have to defend that position than anything else. But that is where the texts have become more important than what they say. They have acquired this sacred kind of thing. And I suppose for a translator, it is a lot of pressure. I can imagine, yes.
It's not funny.
No, it's not, yes. I mean, a literary pursuit has now changed to something else altogether, which is truly unfortunate because in the process you're throttling the chances of the text being read.
I just want to say that I asked her this question
because I live in a very Muslim concentrated area of the city, which is a university campus of Jamia Millia. Shaheen Bagh is next door. So that sense of being, you know, a community which is continuously targeted. But yours is a different, you know, you are, it's amazing. I write on the Quran, I write on various Muslim subjects. Although I started writing when I did my very first translation, it was Ismet Chughai's quilt. And then it became The World Over, because it dealt with the subject at that time was taboo. And then I went on to do short stories, and that's how I entered. But now, you know, yours is a real challenge. Me, I'm targeted for many reasons, but I'm within my, you know, within my area. Although again, if Malik Muhammad Jaisi and if the poets who wrote on Hindu subjects, if they were writing today, they would, I don't think they could come out alive, because it was all about Holi, Diwali, all the joyous festivals, all written by Muslim poets who were all devotees. And neither would the Muslims have spared them, nor would the non-Muslims have spared them. How could you do this? How could you write about Ram, and how could you write about Holi, Diwali and all these festivals? And how dare you write about this? So I think this world, this is a very, I really think that this festival has pointed at a very important, we say Shehrag. Shehrag has, I don't know what is it, jugular vein of our polity by this one thing on the communal disharmony that's in all around us.
And do you find your choices of what to translate also changing because of the prevalent atmosphere?
No, I'm at a point in my life, I really don't care. I could be apprehended any time. I could have any kind of registered any case against me. You come to a point you really don't care. So you're right, I don't really care what I do. But again, don't do it as what you do, but I don't have the capacity to do it. I don't know, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't mean necessarily out of fear, but I mean that you feel that because of the situation, there are certain texts perhaps that people should know about, which you might not have focused so much on at another time. So have you found yourself gravitating towards such texts?
Yeah, again, my objective
book,
has become now to bring, even Muslims, they know so little about Islam. It's just amazing how little they know. They go for this fatwa and that fatwa, never going to the fountainhead. So to me now, I don't really care if the mullah, mullah descends on me or the state descends, it doesn't really matter. This is my objective, and I'm so glad this festival has given me that, that courage and that strength to struggle for whatever time I have left in this direction.
Arshia, do you have something to add to that?
Well, like I said, I only know how to do one thing, which is to read Ramayana. So it's... it's... I have to think now. I used to write about Ramayana and translate it and all much more spontaneously. I used to speak much more spontaneously, and now I'm constantly second guessing. I do have to give everything a second thought, which I suppose is a good thing. It's also called maturity and all like that, but I'm not used to that.
It just struck me that fundamentalists must hate translators, because they're bringing the text to the people instead of allowing them to be interpreted according to the convenience of those who have their own agendas.
But this is a really funny thing with Ramayana, Arunava, and I'm sure I mentioned this to you before. When I was translating Ramayana, Sanskrit Ramayana, it was 30 years ago, and people would think, what you're doing Ramayana? I know. So I said, what you know? I know Ramayana. I said, yeah, tell me a story. Right, from Ramayana. Tell me a story from Sanskrit Ramayana. Nobody knows Sanskrit Ramayana. Everybody knows the Ramayana that is closest to them in their language. Yeah. So somebody will tell me, oh, Lakshman Rekha Darra. I was like, not in Valmiki. Somebody else will tell me something else. Oh, Hanuman did like this. I was like, not in Valmiki. So the Valmiki text is terribly, terribly isolated and underread. And it's actually a brilliant text. I mean, it doesn't carry the harshness. Well, the middle five books don't carry the harshness of the politics, the hierarchies, and all of that. It's marvelously open. Sita's constantly talking back to Rama in challenging and argumentative ways. You know, this idea of the submissive woman, not in Valmiki. She came much later. And again, we forget that whichever Ramayana it is, it was created at a historical moment. People are responding. The tellers, the poets, the audiences are responding to an environment just in the same way that we are. You know, so Amish is writing Ramayana. Ashok Banka wrote Ramayana 20 years ago. These are texts of our time. You know, Amish's Sita is a warrior princess. And I was like, oh my God. She goes to the gym, right? And I'm like, okay, so this is I think maybe Amish thought that he was creating some feminist, new 21st century woman. No, it's a rubbish male gaze creature, right? The men now want their women to be all like buff and, you know, from the gym, and then, you know, also like a reciter of poetry and a scholar, Vidushi, all of this. That is the creature that Amish has created. It is not a feminist idea at all. But it is Lara Croft. Lara Croft is the, you know, an image of our time.
It's what many men think feminists are.
Yes, exactly. Or that feminists would like to be.
We will take some questions from the audience. Please keep the questions short, please. Yes, the lady in black.
Thank you. Because the session was titled Mother Tongues, I'd like to ask a question about how you would define a mother tongue, and if one is bound to more than one language, either by inheritance or passion, in that case, must we define a single mother tongue?
I hadn't thought of it until this very moment, and thank you for bringing that up. I think mother tongue is a very old-fashioned way of identifying oneself, and identifying oneself in terms of language, community, caste, blah, blah, blah. But I love the idea of mother tongue. Also, again, because Ramanujan pointed out that there are father tongues, and the difference between the languages of intimacy, the languages that come to us naturally, the languages we cry in, dream in, those are different from the languages that we speak outside. So in that sense, I'd like to retain very much the idea of the mother tongue as the language with which we are most intimate. And we all have one. Even though we all speak many languages, we have many identities, blah, 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 there is a primary one. You know, so I would like to hold to that idea for the emotional baggage it brings with it, the emotional space it creates.
Thank you. Yes.
This is towards you, Arshia, that you were talking about it, and you said about the translating the word Gajagamini. So do you keep the original word and then in bracket? No, you don't make your readers feel the test of the original word.
Man, it's my job to translate, not to put bracket, footnote, you know, like lexicon or glossary, no. It is my job to make this negotiation. And that's why it's very important that the great texts have multiple translators, right? So if you really want to read Ramayana, do it the easy way. Learn Sanskrit, right? But you're not going to do that. So what is marvelous is that you have 10, 15 Ramayana translations to read, right? So somewhere you will get the word Gajagamini, but not from me.
I want to supplement that with Arshi. And that is, you know, the word for Kehkashan is Milky Way. Now, how can you write the word Milky Way in poetry? Similarly, my book, which was spoken about yesterday, is called Sone Chandi Ke But, which means idols of gold and silver. But the music of Sone Chandi Ke But is different. And nobody turned down that title. It's Sone Chandi Ke But. So I think language, इसी हिसाब से ज़बान को बदलना ही पड़ेगा.
You can lend your words to the other language for some time. Yes, one last question. We have time for one last question if anyone has a question. Everyone's afraid. Well, thank you very much, Syeda and Arshia. I wonder if we should all move back to Calcutta and stay here and do our work here.
Calcutta is a dream.
I know,
We are
right?
stuck in Delhi.